Are you worried about the Antichrist coming and forcing you to have a mark put on your forehead or wrist? Well, watch this video to find out the real story of the mark of the beast. The answers you get here are number 1, logical, and number 2 will alleviate fear to some extent, and number 3 will give you some hope that the mark of the beast can be contained. But it will require all of us to work on containment and prevention. Here are some theories that people have conjured up about what the mark of the beast is, or will be, supposedly. On the left, the theory that a chip would be embedded into everyone's forehead. This illustration also includes the fear that barcodes are the mark. Upper and lower center, well, first the upper, a drawing depicting how 666, the number of the beast, will be stamped or tattooed or even branded into the skin of those under the control by the beast. On the right, a barcode, it being the mark of the beast, tattooed on the forehead. I'm going to be revealing to you, within about the first 15 to 20 minutes of this video, the bottom line meaning of the phrase mark of the beast. That will help you fans of short attention span theater to get to the basic thrust of this video without having to watch the whole video if you don't wish to. If this surprising information in the video sparks an interest, then you can decide to watch the rest of the video to find out why that conclusion was arrived at. Of course, you can watch this video to get that surprise and then come back later to finish the video. There will be some brief initial background information given that you will need before revealing the surprise to help you understand it. These first 4 points to be covered are: first, I'll tell you what a beast is, as defined in the Bible itself. Second, what is a mark and what is its significance? In other words, why the heck do we care about this? Third, we need to have a very brief discussion about whether this phrase is to be taken literally or symbolically. Once you understand 1 through 3, then I'll divulge what the mark of the beast really means, which is why you are watching this video to begin with. Here's the table of contents for this video. Those 4 initial questions we just reviewed that will be answered are in sections 1 through 4, where the red brackets are indicating. Section 1 gets us grounded in reality by learning exactly what a beast is in Bible prophecy terms. When I say get grounded, I mean we need to realign our thoughts out of the realm of unreal, fantastical creatures in the imagery in the book of Revelation, which sometimes leads to downright silly interpretations. You may be familiar with some of these outlandish interpretations. Section 2 is a short explanation of the meaning of the term mark as it is used in the book of Revelation and why it is significant in trying to understand the book of Revelation. Section 3 is a brief discussion on whether this interpretation of mark of the beast is literal or symbolic in meaning. Section 4 will be a fairly short presentation on the bottom line meaning of the phrase mark of the beast. This is what you came here to learn, but you need to know what a mark and a beast are first. By the way, the book of Revelation, the last book in the Christian Bible, is the one and only source of this term, mark of the beast. Section 5 shows several examples of the modern effects and indicators of the mark of the beast and includes a little bit about some theories and examples of the reasons why our modern world is now inundated with these effects of the mark of the beast. Section 6 is a revealing of the root cause of the mark of the beast. Please make sure you see this section too. Its contents will not be surprising once you really think about it, but you must understand this root cause. We can only address and control this mark of the beast prevalent in our society by knowing the root cause. Then, after the answers to those 4 questions are provided and some supplemental information in sections 5 and 6, then the details of the sources of these answers will be reviewed in depth. So those of you who are not interested in long lectures or don't really care about where these answers derive from can exit early with a basic answer but no real understanding of the rationale as to why this is the meaning. Remember, you can always come back later to delve into this background information. Section 7 is simply a read-through of several verses in the book of Revelation that mentions the mark of the beast or makes reference to it. Section 8 gives a detailed explanation of how this conclusion of the meaning of the mark of the beast was arrived at, and how this prophecy was initially fulfilled, that is, when the mark of the beast first appeared in the world. Now we address the question of what exactly is a beast in Bible prophecy terminology. Answer: a beast is an earthly, meaning human king, and or his kingdom or empire. Whether a verse is speaking of a king or his kingdom depends on the context in which the term beast is used. You may wonder the source of this definition. The prophecy terminology in the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation are very, very closely aligned. Also, the time prophecy math is the same, to further highlight this similarity. The source of this meaning of beast is from Daniel chapter 7 verse 17, shown here, quote, "These great beasts which are four kings which shall arise out of the earth," end quote. Arise out of the earth shows that they are human kings, not spiritual or divine kings like Moses or Jesus. Further explanation of this is in section 8 of this video that gives much more background and detail. Next, what is a mark in the book of Revelation? A mark is an indication of spiritual qualities or attributes being exhibited, or the lack of such good spiritual attributes, or having bad spiritual or behavioral characteristics. A mark is a sign of spiritual condition or character of an entity, an individual, a group, or even society. By drawing attention to this mark of the beast, the heavenly entity giving John of Patmos this vision is telling John and us that the presence of this mark or sign in the world is an indication of great importance in this vision. And a mark is a sign or signal that a particular event or condition exists or will soon appear. Along these lines, it is important to remember that Jesus spoke of the signs of the times that come before certain events or conditions occur. This is in Matthew chapter 16, verse 2, that a red sky at night is a sign that the weather will be fair. Then in the next verse, Matthew chapter 16, verse 3, the sign of a red sky in the morning means foul weather is coming. So this mark of the beast is a sign or signal that the beast's marked characteristic will be apparent, as a signal that an event or events or condition of importance is or will become apparent, like the red sky is a signal of weather conditions to come. What then is this mark or sign signaling? First, we must understand that the book of Revelation is the vision story of the future appearance of the returned Christ, also known as the Messiah of the latter days. This sign of the beast in the world is one of the many, many signals that the Messiah has appeared or will soon appear in our world. The other signs of his coming are in the many other prophecies of the Messiah of the latter days found in the book of Revelation, the rest of the New Testament, and in the Old Testament as well. By the way, this king or beast is the infamous beast whose name is 666 in Revelation chapter 13, verse 18. The three bad beasts of the book of Revelation, including 666, are explained in section 8 of this video. I have several videos that explain this too. I'll put links to these other videos in the video description for this video on YouTube. The presence of the mark or sign of the beast is a sign or signal that certain conditions are present and or will soon be coming. Since the book of Revelation is about the future appearance of a manifestation of God, the return Christ, if the mark or a sign of the beast is present and recognized as such, a sign of the beast that is, it means that the foretold divine messenger has appeared. The presence of the sign or signal reveals what was hidden if you are watching for it. You may be wondering if the meaning of the mark of the beast term is to be interpreted literally or symbolically, meaning spiritually or materially. For this short answer I'm giving you, it is the spiritual or symbolic meaning that will be given. Symbolic spiritual meanings of prophecies are far more meaningful, more profound in their effects on human society, and are more long-lasting in those effects than simple literal fulfillment. The full explanation of this prophecy gives both a literal fulfillment as well as symbolic meaning. That is given in section 8 of this video if you want to find out more. Here are some examples of possible literal marks of the beast, meaning marks made having to do with a king or his kingdom. But the literal meaning is not important. See the whole video to see why. Here it is, question number 4 from that list. What then does the mark of the beast or sign of the beast really mean? The real, important, symbolic meaning of the mark of the beast, the only meaning of great and lasting import, is that the sign of the beast is corruption. I'm going to let that sink in just a bit. The sign of the beast is corruption. High levels of corruption are a signal that the return of Christ has happened or is soon to happen. When combined with other prophecy fulfillment indicators, of course, his presence can be more precisely determined, of course, when we include the other prophecies. For those of you who are expecting the Christ to return any day now, sorry to burst your bubble, but Christ is not coming in the present or the future. I'm sorry to break that news to you. But do not be sad. There is happy news. Glad tidings. The Messiah has already returned. He lived from 1817 to 1892 in the Middle East. He taught his new revelation from God from 1853 to 1892 and is buried in the Holy Land. The new Messiah, the returned Christ, was born in Persia in 1817, was exiled from his native land in 1853 by order of the Shah or King of Persia because of the beginnings of his new faith from God, which was very unpopular with the Muslim clergy and the government in the country. The Messiah of the latter days spent much of his life as a prisoner of the Ottoman Empire in the hopes of both of these two empires, the Ottoman and the Persian, that he would die in the prison city of Akka and his faith would die with him. On this map of the Middle East, Persia, now called Iran, is shown in the medium green color background on the right. The Ottoman Empire is the dark tan areas. The path of the forced exiles that the new Messiah suffered started in 1853 when he was exiled from his native Persia. That's where that red and yellow line starts on the right. It starts at Tehran, Persia. He was exiled several more times in the following years until in 1868 when he was sent to the prison city of Akka, which is at the end of that yellow and red line. The Shah of Persia was a special case. He was the beast referred to in Revelation chapter 13, verse 18, also known as the infamous beast known by the number 666. He was corrupt and encouraged corruption in his kingdom. Further explanation of how the effects of this corruption was a characteristic of he and his kingdom is provided later in section 8 of this video and in my other videos on the mark of the beast that gives the full explanation. See the clickable link in the description of this video on YouTube. The foretold Elijah figure who would appear and herald the coming of the Messiah and the new Messiah himself are listed here. The Bab, the Elijah figure, was born in 1819 Common Era. Common Era simply means the same as AD, by the way. The Bab was born in Persia, now known as Iran. He was killed in July 1850 by order of the Shah, or King of Persia. He was killed because the priests of Shia Islam, the mullahs, felt threatened by the Bab's teachings that he was a manifestation of God and also the forerunner of the one the Bab called him whom God shall make manifest, meaning the Messiah for the age, who would soon appear. Baha'u'llah, the Messiah, was born in 1817 in Tehran, the capital city of Persia. He was of noble birth, his father being a minister in the Shah's government. Baha'u'llah became a disciple of the Bab, was imprisoned for his beliefs, lost all his material wealth and position in society, and was exiled out of Persia by the Shah simply for being a disciple of the Bab at first. The Bab publicly declared his divine identity and mission in May of 1844. In addition to his divine title of the gate or door, which is what the word Bab means in English, a couple other of his divine titles include the Lamb, prophesied in the book of Revelation by that term, and the Exalted One. He's the Elijah figure to the coming of Baha'u'llah, just as John the Baptist was to Jesus Christ. Then Baha'u'llah declared his divine identity and mission in April of 1863. His divine title is Baha'u'llah, which means the glory of God in English. He fulfills the prophecy and revelation of the appearance of he who sits on the throne. Other divine titles include Messiah and Lord of Hosts, among many others. Here is a quote from the writings of the new Messiah of the latter days, Baha'u'llah. He is speaking to the whole world. Quote, "Call out to Zion, O Carmel, and announce the joyful tidings. He that was hidden from mortal eyes is come. His all-conquering sovereignty is manifest. His all-encompassing splendor is revealed. Beware lest thou hesitate or halt. Hasten forth and circumambulate the city of God that hath descended from heaven, the celestial Kaaba, round which have circled in adoration the favored of God, the pure in heart, and the company of the most exalted angels. Oh, how I long to announce unto every spot on the surface of the earth, and to carry to each one of its cities the glad tidings of this revelation, a revelation to which the heart of Sinai hath been attracted, and in whose name the burning bush is calling, unto God the Lord of Lords belong the kingdoms of earth and heaven. Verily, this is the day in which both land and sea rejoice at this announcement, the day for which have been laid up those things which God, through a bounty beyond the ken of mortal mind or heart, hath destined for revelation. Ere long will God sail his ark upon thee, and will manifest the people of Baha who have been mentioned in the book of names." End quote. The people of Baha are simply meaning the followers of Baha'u'llah. The word Baha means glory. The name Baha'u'llah means the glory of God. If the Messiah has returned, then the mark or sign of the beast must also be present and observable in the world. Thus the question we must answer is there significant corruption anywhere? If yes, there is significant corruption, then that could indicate the Messiah has been here in the not too distant past, or is present or soon to appear. But in prophecy fulfillment terms, this is just one of many signs that have been foretold in both the Old and New Testaments to help us identify the Messiah when he comes. But you have to look at the intersection of the many prophesied events as being signs of his coming to really hone in on who may or may not be the expected Messiah. For example, here are some conditions from other prophecies in the Bible that should also be happening as or a part of the revelation that the new Messiah will bring, not just the presence of the mark or sign of the beast. The fulfillment of these prophecies should intersect with the people and events that occur with the appearance of the Messiah and his forerunner so that we can identify them. First on this list of just a few such signs of the times is that the Bible foretells the return of the Christ, the Messiah, in the book of Daniel, chapter 8, verses 13 and 14, known as the 2300 days prophecy. The year of return was 1844, by the way, according to this Bible time prophecy. This is explained further in section 8 of this video. The Bab and Baha'u'llah fulfilled the Bible's time prophecy for the return of the Christ, by the way. Also, the Bible says that the Messiah would have a forerunner, an Elijah figure, just as John the Baptist was for Jesus Christ. This is in the book of Malachi, chapter 4, verse 5. The Bab fulfilled these prophecies. And some key locations would be involved in the Messiah's life, such as ancient Elam. That's in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 49, verse 38. And the areas of Carmel and Sharon in the Holy Land, according to Isaiah chapter 35, verse 2, and Micah chapter 7, verse 12, also mentions some travels of the Messiah. The Bab and Baha'u'llah fulfilled them too. Then there's the prophecy that he would come from the east to the Holy Land, according to Ezekiel chapter 43, verses 2 to 4, and Matthew chapter 24, verse 27, and many other prophecies. That was fulfilled by the Bab and Baha'u'llah. The Bible states that the Messiah will bring a plan for peace, according to Isaiah chapter 9, verses 6 and 7, and in Isaiah chapter 54, verse 10, which Baha'u'llah did, by the way. That is, he brought a plan for humanity to achieve world peace. Humanity has not followed it yet, thus we still do not have a full peace, however. Baha'u'llah foretold that there would come a time that a lesser peace would develop when the nations of the world finally figure out collective methods of controlling renegade groups and nations. The United Nations was originally designed to do this by collective means, but got diverted from this design by various powerful entities. But note, the world is approaching achieving this lesser peace, as indicated by its recent response to the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. It is going to be a while yet, though, before the nations learn the lesson that all nations must collectively take action when a renegade group or nation invades another nation or meddles in its affairs to the detriment of that nation and or other nations. Note that there is a mythology that has built up through the centuries that when the Messiah appears, that all the problems of the world will instantly disappear like magic. Actually, humanity will have to work very, very hard once a fairly significant number of us finally recognize the new Messiah, Baha'u'llah, and start to follow his counsels and laws, to start to build God's kingdom on earth. No free lunches in sight. Everyone won't have to become followers of Baha'u'llah to do this. Just find common cause in trying to do this. The sign of the beast is just a small factor among many other factors or signs in the grand scheme of God's prophecies of the appearance of the Messiah of the latter days. So, if Baha'u'llah is the Messiah, then there should have been a significant amount of corruption when and where he appeared. Thus, we need to look at corruption at the time the Messiah walked the earth in the 1800s. A reminder, the Shah, king of Persia, was Nasir-din Shah Qajar at the time. Again, this Shah was the beast, 666. The Shah's kingdom was thoroughly filled with corruption from top to bottom. Gifts, so to speak, were required in all government and much private business transactions. In other words, bribery was the lubricant of most transactions in Persia at the time the forerunner and Messiah walked the earth. Persia did not invent bribery, rather it was the scale of the corruption that was remarkable. Most of the Muslim clergy, too, were corrupt in their wielding of power. Their religious organization was forever warped by their denial of the divine identity of the forerunner who proclaimed his identity in 1844, and then the Messiah thereafter. The clergy agitated the king's government to have the forerunners and the Messiah's followers persecuted and killed. This resulted in the killing of the forerunner and imprisonment, torturing, and exiling of the Messiah by the Persian government. This spiritual corruption of the clergy was also important in this vision story in the book of Revelation. In fact, I think it was the most grievous corruption of all, the Muslim clergy at the time working against the will of God. Even to this day in Iran and some other countries, Baha'is, followers of the Bab and Baha'u'llah, are tragically persecuted. Just a wee bit of history of Persia here. The corrupt Persian Qajar dynasty of Shahs was dethroned in 1925. An army officer took power in 1925 and set himself up as the first of the Pahlavi Shahs. Note that Persia officially changed its name to Iran in 1935. The name Iran is actually of ancient origins. The name of Persia mostly came from non-Iranian entities, especially of the West. A democracy effort was attempted in the 1940s and 50s, but was thwarted by corrupt powers from within and outside of Iran. The 1979 revolution resulted in the Shia Muslim clergy gaining power. The Islamic Republic of Iran, as it's called, is also corrupt and not favored by the majority of its citizens due to that and corruption, and because of the strict fundamentalist authoritarian nature of their governing. Recent actions of protests in Iran led by women against forced use of the hijab head covering and other restrictions on women, and on men too, illustrate the frustration with their rule. Corruption in the land of the birth of the new Messiah has not improved since his time in the 1800s. But what about corruption elsewhere in today's world? Not just in Iran, but in the whole world. The Messiah is to come for the betterment of the whole world, after all, not just one people, religion, or nation. The world has not recognized the new Messiah, Baha'u'llah, since he first proclaimed his identity in 1863, except for about 7 million followers of the faith he started, called the Baha'i faith. Corruption, meanwhile, seems to be flourishing throughout the world. Not just bribery, but every imaginable type of fraud, stealing, misuse of government, political and influence peddlers, etc., etc., etc. To gauge and quantify the status of corruption in the world, I'll review 3 monitors of corruption or corruption-related indicators. My purpose here is to verify by data from others, not just me, that prove that corruption is indeed a worldwide problem, a recognized worldwide sign, meaning that the mark of the beast is permeating the whole world. First is the Rule of Law Index. Second is the Corruption Perceptions Index. And third is the Atlas of Impunity. Impunity means exemption from punishment or freedom from the injurious consequences of an action. So this report rates and ranks countries based on how well they have fair laws and apply them equally to their citizens and inhabitants. The organizations which conducted these studies and issued their findings are separate entities. More about each is coming up as we briefly review the findings of each of these reports. The first of these reports on international behavior, so to speak, is the Rule of Law Index for 2022, put together by the World Justice Project. The link to this report is shown on the slide. The World Justice Project Rule of Law Index, as they describe it on their website, is the latest report in an annual series measuring the rule of law based on the experiences and perceptions of the general public and in-country legal practitioners and experts worldwide. The World Justice Project organization describes themselves as an independent, multidisciplinary organization working to advance the rule of law worldwide. Here is a list of issues and factors that are examined in this study of 140 nations in the world. These nations are then rated and then ranked in how well they are doing in these categories. These examined issues and factors are categorized as follows: constraints on government powers, absence of corruption, open government, fundamental rights, order and security, regulatory enforcement, civil justice, and criminal justice. These 140 countries were ranked from best to worst by their scores. The end result of this research was a report in which 140 countries and territories were ranked according to how well they did on these 8 indicators that we reviewed. Here you see the top 10 ranked nations which had very good scores on these categories. Number 1 is Denmark, then Norway, Finland, Sweden, Netherlands, Germany, New Zealand, Luxembourg, Estonia, and then number 10 is Ireland. The United States is ranked as number 26, just after Latvia and Uruguay. The second of these reports is the Corruption Perception Index of 2022, compiled by Transparency International. You can access this report at the website given on this slide. What is the Transparency International that produced the Corruption Perception Index? According to their website, Transparency International is a global movement working in over 100 countries to end the injustice of corruption. They focus on issues with the greatest impact on people's lives and hold the powerful to account for the common good. Through their advocacy, campaigning, and research, they work to expose the systems and networks that enable corruption to thrive, demanding greater transparency and integrity in all areas of the public. Their mission is to stop corruption and promote transparency, accountability, and integrity at all levels and across all sectors of society. They are an independent, non-governmental, not-for-profit organization and work with like-minded partners across the world to end the injustice of corruption. And this quote from Transparency International, quote, "We hold the powerful and the corrupt to account by exposing the systems and networks that enable corruption. We advocate for policies and build coalitions to change the status quo. Our vision of a corruption-free world is not an end in itself. It is the fight for social and economic justice, human rights, peace, and security." End quote. Here are 3 excerpts in the 3 columns here from their ratings and rankings in that report of 180 countries based on perceptions of corruption. Those having the highest rating scores are ranked the highest. So Denmark, with the highest rating score of 90, is ranked as number 1. Note that next to the score to the left of the name of the country, there is an arrow pointing up or down or an equal sign. So if we look at Finland, ranked in 2022 at number 2, its score is 87, but the arrow is pointing down, so this score is actually a bit down from the previous report. Denmark's score is up from the previous report. In the left segment are the top 10 ranked as best, that is, having the highest scores, which means that they had the lowest levels of perceived corruption in their societies. Those 10 countries are listed there. If you count 11, that's because the last 2 are in a tie for slot number 10. Note that the USA is not among the top 10 of the least corrupt nations. The middle column shows nations number 18 through 31. The USA is at ranking number 24, and it's highlighted by the thick pink box. This score of 69 is up from the previous report. The list on the far right shows the nations ranked at the very bottom, the usual suspects for bad behaviors of countries. That data in the charts was put on a global map that you see here. Their scoring and rankings are from their own studies and scoring methods. On this map, the worst nations, those that are perceived as being the most corrupt, are shaded the darkest, and the best are in the yellows and light oranges. You can see the color legend at the bottom there to help you decipher which are the best and the worst in the world. The third of those 3 reports is illustrated in the Atlas of Impunity, a map that shows the nations that have the least impunity up to the most impunity on a color-coded map. The Eurasia Group organization is the author of this report. It was founded in the year 1998 by Ian Bremmer. Their website for this report is in the middle of this slide. Here's an abbreviated quote from their website that gives the gist of their organization's mission. Quote, "We live in an era of volatility and uncertainty, one that generates both risks and opportunities for businesses and investors around the world. We are committed to helping our clients understand and navigate this changing geopolitical landscape and to make better informed decisions in an uncertain world." End quote. Also from their website, this quote, "The Atlas of Impunity is chaired by an external, independent global advisory board composed of human rights experts and activists, former diplomats, and former government officials with a range of regional and policy perspectives. The Atlas was made possible through a grant from the Open Society Foundations." End quote. Before we get to the Atlas of Impunity, we better define what impunity is. Impunity is the exercise of power without accountability, which becomes, in its starkest form, the commission of crimes without punishment. In a phrase, impunity is the idea that the law is for suckers, a notion that human rights leaders fear is on the rise in political institutions around the world. From behavior in conflict to economic exploitation, from environmental degradation to democratic backsliding, the battle between impunity and accountability is a critical lens for understanding what is happening in the world. End quote. That was a quote, by the way. The Atlas of Impunity, issued in February of 2023, is a quantitative assessment of this holistic definition of impunity, measured by independent indicators across 5 aspects in society. These dimensions include unaccountable governance, human rights abuse, conflict and violence, economic exploitation, and environmental degradation. The Atlas scores and ranks the level of impunity in 163 countries and provides partial indicative scoring for another 34. That's 197 countries total. Countries are scored on a scale of 0 to 5, with the countries exhibiting the greatest level of impunity scoring closer to 5, and the countries with the lowest level of impunity scoring closer to 0. Here is the atlas graphic of their report. The nations with the best records regarding impunity are in the dark blue. Their scores were between 0 up to and including 0.99. The next best scores are in green. After that is a yellow color. Orange is next to last, and the dark magenta or brown countries are last. To clarify, the nations with the highest scores have the highest levels in their societies of the exercise of power without accountability, which becomes, in its starkest form, the commission of crimes without punishment. In a phrase, impunity is the idea that law is for suckers, according to the authors of this study. On the left are the 5 worst countries listed. These are the ones having the highest level of impunity. Afghanistan is number 1, then Syria, Yemen, Myanmar, and Central African Republic. On the right are the 5 best: Finland, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and Germany. After all that, I thought we should spend just a little time defining what corruption is. In researching for this video, I Googled the definition of corruption. Surprisingly, the first few definitions basically centered on corruption being bribery. It was as if bribery is the only form of corruption, so it would be rather misleading if you don't go further. The actual definition from experts in corruption is far, far broader and deeper than that. Bribery is just one small possible aspect of corruption. Let's investigate just a little for more clarity. Just FYI, there is no international legal definition of corruption. Each country has its own definition, or not. The detail of laws and rules vary from country to country and range from non-existent to very sketchy to quite broad and strict. Enforcement varies considerably too. In the USA, the definition varies by whether it involves dealings with the federal government or involving federal laws and statutes, such as interstate commerce and other federal level dealings, to actions in a state or locality's jurisdictions. Many businesses and non-governmental organizations develop their own rules about what they consider corruption that's worthy of disciplinary action. But always keep in mind that something can be corrupt yet be perfectly legal, or at least not illegal. Laws and regulations do not always get passed as soon as new methods of corruption are devised. There is a lag time, sometimes very lengthy lag times, between when a corruption type is recognized and when laws are actually passed. Lately, we in the USA have seen legislators at all levels of government, city, county, state, federal, attempt to pass or actually pass laws that weaken or abolish the ability of the courts and justice systems having jurisdiction from restricting or punishing the corruption of the legislators themselves. In effect, eliminating the checks and balances of our democracy, which sets up certain centers of power to do as they please, which is corrupt in itself and can lead to more corruption. And this is not a partisan political statement on my part. Any individual or group trying to set themselves up as being solely in charge of the political decision-making process is at very high risk of becoming corrupt itself and fostering corruption in the society as a whole. That goes for the other 2 legs of democracy too. The executive branch must not have exclusive power, nor the judicial branch. The Transparency Institute, the authors of the Corruption Perception Index, define corruption as the abuse of entrusted power for private gain. For sure, when someone acts corruptly, they tend to show a deliberate intent, an improper purpose or motivation. The effects of corruption includes the erosion of trust, the weakening of democracy, hampering of economic development, exacerbation of inequality, poverty, social division, and the environmental crisis. In searching the internet for illustrations of the definition of corruption, I came across a table devised by the company listed on the lower left corner of the slide. That's their website, corruptioncontrol.com. Note that I do not know anything about this company. I'm definitely not shilling for them since I don't know them at all. I just liked their chart for my purpose here. Note that their illustration had only the 4 columns on the left of this table. I inserted the column on the far right titled Media and Information, since I think that category is not truly reflected in the other columns. There may be some other categories that could rightly be added. I added the Media and Information column because society cannot identify and combat corruption if true information about it is unavailable or is mis- or disinformation is being planted in the media. Not all types of corruption is in the list, I'm sure. Pause the video to more closely review them. Note in the power column, the blue column, that predatory practices is at the top. So many of the other listed practices involve predatory practices. It seems to be a basis of so much corruption in all these categories. Obviously, there are many corrupt practices way beyond mere bribery. Money laundering, various asset schemes, forced labor, predatory practices, already was mentioned. Impunity, we covered that, is listed here. Obstruction of justice, etc. In the yellow column titled Media and Information, note the top, weakened antitrust laws and enforcement, is a major corruption concern these days, at least with me. Also that there's so much mis- and disinformation in the media, as well as a lot of good information too, I might add. As mentioned, problems in the media and information quality opens the doors to corruption. Just a few more slides on this topic, then we'll get on to section 5. We've dived into the definition of corruption, but corruption of what? This section is just to broaden the spectrum of our thinking of what corruption can impact, even destroy. Here are several sectors in our society. This is my list, so it's not necessarily complete or correct. I've listed these sectors alphabetically, not in order of importance. I listed business and finance together, that's number 2, but I've divided out a couple subsets due to their importance in our society, such as number 1, agriculture, number 3, communications and technology, number 5, the entertainment industry, number 7, the healthcare industry, and number 9, the news media. Then we have number 4, education, number 6, government at all levels, number 8, the law and legal systems, number 10, politics, which includes partisan politics, dealing with identified factions in power, or desiring power, number 11, religion, number 12, research and academia, those that are independent or aligned with independent universities rather than associated with businesses. Number 13, the social media, and number 14, independent social services and charities, those not affiliated with government or religious organizations. Here I have depicted those 14 societal sectors as billiard balls. Corruption in one sector does not just affect that sector. It also affects one or more other sectors, like a billiard ball crashing into other billiard balls, sending them all off kilter and misdirected. The sphere of society called religion is especially powerful, and when religion is corrupted, that power will have especially corrosive effects to the society. We humans are primarily, in our essential essence, spiritual beings. Corruption of individual believers can possibly corrupt the religion itself, meaning a religion can catch the virus of corruption from the outside influences on its members. Corruption of religion weakens that religion. Corrupted religion is especially powerful due to its effects on our very core identity or existence. We take our religious beliefs, our religion, into every other aspect of our lives, and vice versa. The material world impacts religion. Here are two short excerpts from the writings of Baha'u'llah to illustrate God's desire that we not let the material world shape our spiritual lives. They are both from his book named Hidden Words. Quote, "O son of being, busy not thyself with this world, for with fire we test the gold, and with gold we test our servants." End quote. And, O friends, abandon not the everlasting beauty, for a beauty that must die, and set not your affections on this mortal world of dust. According to Baha'u'llah, the Messiah for this new era, he reveals to us that we are essentially and foremost spiritual entities, not material. Corruption has to do with the material world, not God's realm of the spirit. Now the root cause of corruption can be revealed. Malignant materialism. Malignant materialism. Of course, this should be of no surprise. No rocket science needed here. This disease, when it overcomes and takes over the mind and soul of an individual, is a spiritual disease, and it can be contagious. Like alcoholism or other addiction to drugs, it is only when the individual recognizes his or her disease and takes steps to return balance to his or her life can the disease be contained or cured. That is the same with our societal addiction to the material side of life. Malignant materialism in our societies across the globe skews the souls, hearts, and minds of men, women, and even children. This mad quest for wealth, power, fame, ego satisfaction, these, among other elements of greed, have been the bane of human existence since forever. Remember how the Bible condemns the love of money in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 10 as the root of all evil. Note that it is not money that is the problem, it's the love of money that is to blame for the spiritual downfall of many. What about curing society of corruption as a whole? Many of us are wondering if it is at all possible at this point in our moral decline to do so. This is the reason why I made this video, to try to get us all to unite and recognize how far down the tunnel of corruption we have gone as a society and as a world, and to start to do something about it. But what can we do? For the secular society, this advice from one of those three entities that compiled those reports we saw earlier, that advice is, quote, "Exposing corruption and holding the corrupt to account can only happen if we understand the way corruption works and the systems that enable it." End quote. How we do that is beyond the scope of this video and my expertise, but we need to educate ourselves and try to recognize and understand the forces of corruption all around us, and then, minimally, not participate in the corruption as individuals. Now, individuals who are in positions of power and decision-making of some sort may be able to do more and should do more to rein in corruption whenever possible. The corruption in your religion is partially addressed in the prophecies in the book of Revelation. Why, you may wonder? Remember, this prophecy of the mark of the beast is from the book of Revelation, and the purpose of that book is to foretell the appearances of three prophets or manifestations of God to come after Jesus Christ. The first that was foretold was Muhammad. The second and third of these manifestations of God were the Bab and Baha'u'llah, respectively. that were briefly introduced earlier in this video, just FYI. The book of Revelation begins in chapters 2 and 3 by telling the 7 churches to, number 1, recognize their corruption and then overcome it. Don't ignore the corruption that is mentioned in Revelation, but to eliminate it. Chapters 2 and 3 in the book of Revelation contain some praises and some complaints that Jesus Christ gives to John about these 7 churches in 7 letters that are sent to them in this prophetic vision story. These letters are instructions that Jesus gives to the 7 churches and can be interpreted in at least 3 ways. First, as instructions to 7 actual small Christian churches that existed at the time of John of Patmos, which were very few, and none of these specifically named churches exist any longer. Second, the view that these letters are prophecies about the conditions of the future Christian church as a whole, through 7 stages until the return of the Christ Spirit. Remember, John of Patmos received this vision within the 1st century of the existence of Christianity, and it is now almost 2,000 years later. And or the third way of interpreting the purposes of these 7 letters to 7 so-called churches are as prophecies and instructions to 7 separate religions in the world. In other words, the churches, that word, is a cover or code name for 7 religions in the world. The book of Revelation is about the return of the Christ Spirit, who would be returning for the betterment of humanity as a whole, not just for a few. My view is that these letters, meaning instructions from Jesus Christ, most importantly, are describing 7 separate religions and what they need to do to eliminate problem areas in their faiths, meaning corruptions in their faiths, to prepare to recognize the Savior to come that is foretold in each of their faiths when he appears in the world. This Savior of each of these religions is embodied in the same manifestation of God, who fulfills the prophecies in all 7 of these faiths, who are the Bab and Baha'u'llah. Note that many of these 7 faiths foretell 2 divine messengers who would appear at the same time or in close succession. The angel of each of the 7 faiths is the prophet of God who brought that revelation to humanity. Each angel of each church, meaning religion of God, is entered into the middle column here. Then the faith they brought to humanity is in the column on the right. So, the angel of the church of Ephesus was Abraham. Yes, Abraham was a prophet. The Bible states this in Genesis chapter 20, verses 6 and 7. At the time of John of Patmos, who received this vision we know as the book of Revelation, there were still people who were monotheists in the Middle East, but who were not Jewish. Many were remnants of the followers of the religion of Abraham. Some believe the Sabaeans were some of these people. At the time of Muhammad, these non-Jewish, non-Christian monotheists were referred to as Hanif or Hanifa. The angel of the church of Smyrna was Moses. Note that in the far right column is the religion this angel Moses founded, meaning Judaism. The angel of Pergamos was Krishna, and his church or faith is the Hindu faith. Thyatira is Zoroaster, meaning Zarathustra, and his Zoroastrian faith. Then Sardis, its angel is Buddha, founder of the Buddhist faith. Philadelphia's angel, Jesus Christ, founder of Christianity. Then for the 7th church, Laodicea, the religion that did not yet exist at the time of John of Patmos, is angel Muhammad and his faith of Islam. So this letter is to the future faith of Islam. A note here to those who do not believe that Islam is a religion of God, please see my video titled The Prophet Muhammad Foretold in the Bible. I will put a clickable link to it in the description for this video on YouTube. In this table, for the next 3 slides, including this slide, are listed the corruptions that Christ points out in his vision given to John of Patmos for each of these 7 religions. When their religion succeeds in eliminating these corruptions of their practices, then they will be in God's good graces and will then be able to recognize their foretold Savior that each of these religions expect. All the prophecies in the faiths of a coming Savior have been fulfilled by the appearances of the Bab and Baha'u'llah. The first letter to the Church of Ephesus, that's for those who follow Abraham's teachings, such as the Sabaean tribes and Hanif and their modern similar tribes in that area of the world, that of the Middle East before Christianity and Islam. This faith has basically ceased to exist as a separate faith after the appearance of Muhammad. Second letter for the Jews, their problems to be overcome are, first, attachment to the material world, and second, their failure to recognize the first coming of the Messiah. Thus, this will be an opportunity to be given a second chance by recognizing the returned Messiah, Baha'u'llah, thus overcoming their spiritual blindness. Third letter for the followers of the Hindu faith, their problem to be overcome is the elimination of idol worship. They are cautioned that their foretold 10th avatar, referred to as Kalki in Hindu tradition, but will have a new name, not Kalki. According to Baha'i prophecy interpretation, this foretold entity is Baha'u'llah. The fourth letter to the Church of Thyatira, which is a code name for Zoroastrianism, their challenge is also to excise idol worship from their practices. Idol worship is one of the practices that is referred to in the book of Revelation as fornication, meaning corruption. Note that Zoroastrianism originated in ancient Persia, the land that would eventually give birth to the new Messiah of the latter days and his forerunner in the 1800s. Now known as Iran. Iran will eventually become honored to have contributed the new Messiah who will bring peace to the world, thus a special place among the nations of earth. That is why in verse 26 of chapter 2 it foretells that this church, Thyatira, will have power over the nations. Next is letter number 5 to the Church of Sardis, meaning Buddhism. The Buddhists are challenged to go back to their original teachings of Buddha, of which few survive, meaning the teaching that there is one God. That belief in God has been lost. Their corrupted practices and beliefs in an endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, instead of hope for eternal life, is being condemned. They are also counseled to remember the prophecies of the coming of the Buddha of Universal Fellowship, also referred to as the Buddha Maitreya, or the fifth Buddha, who is Baha'u'llah, of course. Then there is the sixth letter to the Church of Philadelphia. Philadelphia means brotherly love. Obviously, this name is a cover name for Christianity, since brotherly love is a main teaching of Jesus Christ. The Christian church is chastised here for being split up into countless sects and the resultant disunity. They are challenged to keep the faith that the Christ Spirit will return as promised. They are cautioned to be aware that the returned Christ Spirit will have a new name when he comes, neither the name Jesus nor Christ. That new name is Baha'u'llah, which means the glory of God. Now for the last, the seventh letter to the Church of Laodicea. Laodicea is the code name for the faith of Islam. Islam is the only faith of the seven that was not in existence during the lifetime of John of Patmos. It's interesting to note that the word Laodicea actually means lukewarm. Now in the letter, the followers of Islam are mentioned as being lukewarm. The verses mention that God would rather they be hot or cold, not lukewarm, meaning lukewarm in devotion. After Muhammad revealed his faith in the Quran, the holy book of Islam, his pure faith was diverted from its pure path by some enemies who took over the leadership of what came to be the Sunni branch of Islam. These leaders of the Umayyad clan were deeply, irretrievably corrupted by malignant materialism. They infused their materialistic corruption throughout the faith. This is the corruption that needs to be expunged from Islam, that has sapped the spiritual strength of Islam. See Section 8 for more details of that. In my opinion, all faiths should examine their own beliefs and practices and ferret out any of the types of corruptions mentioned previously in this video, not just in the Book of Revelation. But please note, one type of corruption has not yet been mentioned and needs to be highlighted and not forgotten or minimized. Sexual predatory behaviors, too, should be identified and perpetrators referred to local law enforcement. Any shielding of such perpetrators should also be subject to local law enforcement, too. Why I mention local law enforcement is to highlight that such individuals should not be protected or shielded by claims of separation of church and state. That's a path, if followed, would result in corruption of both the state and the church, religion. What about religions not mentioned here? Well, examine your own faith and determine if any of God's complaints in the book of Revelation apply to your church, then those need to be addressed. Perhaps there are other signs of corruption that need to be investigated and eliminated if found. Several of the faiths were counseled to eliminate idol worship from their religious practices. Our modern versions of idol worship should be included in that effort to purify our religions. Some of the things that perhaps should be considered as modern idols we have mistakenly started to worship include wealthy and/or powerful people. Many fall victim to this erroneous equation of wealth with being favored by God, thus thinking we should follow the examples of the wealthy or powerful people. And ditto for famous people, celebrities, sports figures, including celebrity coaches. Fame itself, people posting things on TikTok or YouTube for the attention, has become an addiction, perhaps jeopardizing their relationship to God and other people. The acquisition of stuff of all kinds, especially the latest craze, from the latest shoes to the latest kitchens. In regards to idol worship in religions, perhaps the introduction of entertainment values in religious observations could be considered as idol worship. Something to think about anyway. Regarding sports, I can't help but think about how Karl Marx said that religion was the opiate of the masses. Nowadays, it seems to be that sports is the opiate of the masses. Here's our table of contents again. We've made great progress, as you see. All we have left is a run-through of the 8 verses of the book of Revelation that mention the mark of the beast or references to it, and section 8, which contains more details explaining how the mark of the beast really is a reference to corruption perpetrated by the beast 666, and which still exists and is getting worse throughout the world. The 3 bad beasts of the book of Revelation will also be explained in section 8, including the last one, which is the beast named 666. This is just a little bit of the plan I have for how I'm going to present this section 8. First, we'll have a review of quotes, chapter and verse from the book of Revelation where Mark is mentioned. Then we'll have an explanation of the 3 bad beasts in the book of Revelation. Then a few additional comments on the mark of the beast prophecy as to the literal fulfillment and the spiritual or symbolic fulfillment. And then at the end, a reveal of the year of the appearance of the Messiah, according to Bible time prophecies. The next 8 slides will be a run-through of the verses in the book of Revelation where the word mark and the phrase mark of the beast are found. In this chart, I have listed all the mentions of the word mark in the column on the left. Out of all those listings, only 2 verses actually have the phrase mark of the beast that's listed in the column on the right. Those 2 verses that state mark of the beast are chapter 16 verse 2 and chapter 19 verse 20. Just a note, in the column on the left, just below halfway down, chapter 15 verse 2 is noted as being in the King James Version, but the word mark is not present in some other versions of the Bible in that verse, such as the New International Version, NIV for short, and a few others. Out of a small sample of various Bible versions that I checked, it seemed to be about 50% of that small sample did not use the word mark in that verse, verse 2 of chapter 15. Just an FYI for what it's worth. We begin with Revelation chapter 13 verse 16, quote, "And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads." End quote. And in the very next verse, 2, verse 17, quote, "And that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name." End quote. Moving on to the next chapter, chapter 14, verse 9, quote, "And the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, If any man worship the beast and his image, and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand." End quote. Still in chapter 14, verse 11, quote, "And the smoke of their torment ascendeth up for ever and ever, and they have no rest, day nor night, who worship the beast and his image, and whosoever receiveth the mark of his name." End quote. On to chapter 15, verse 2, quote, "And I saw as it were a sea of glass mingled with fire, and them that had gotten the victory over the beast, and over his image, and over his mark, and over the number of his name, stand on the sea of glass, having the harps of God." End quote. Next chapter, chapter 16, verse 2, quote, "And the first went and poured out his vial upon the earth, and there fell a noisome and grievous sore upon the men which had the mark of the beast, and upon them which worshipped his image." End quote. Jumping from chapter 16 to 19, verse 20, quote, "And the beast was taken, and with him the false prophet that wrought miracles before him, with which he deceived them that had received the mark of the beast, and them that worshipped his image. These both were cast alive into a lake of fire burning with brimstone." End quote. Chapter 20, verse 4, quote, "And I saw thrones, and they sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them. And I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Jesus, and for the word of God, and which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither had received his mark upon their foreheads, or in their hands. And they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years." End quote. That's the end of the mentions of Mark in the book of Revelation, and in the whole Bible, of course, since the book of Revelation is the last book of the Bible. This mention is in chapter 20, and there are only 22 chapters in Revelation. But most importantly, it's the end of the beast and of the false prophet. Here I have condensed the key quotes from these 8 verses in this table. And in the next 2 slides, this is the first slide, and then there's one more. You can pause the video if you want to review these quotes more closely. Here are key quotes 6 through 8. Again, pause the video if you wish to see them more closely. Just a reminder here to gather our thoughts as we venture forth. First, a beast is an earthly king and/or his kingdom or empire. A mark is of a characteristic of whoever is being marked, thus is a sign of that entity or their condition. The beast of our prophecy was thoroughly corrupt, thus his mark is a sign of corruption. And it needs to be emphasized again that the book of Revelation is a prophecy of future events, the future to John of Patmos around the year 90 to 95 Common Era. The book of Revelation foretells the coming of three woes. A woe, according to the Bible, is a prophet or manifestation of God. Next, I will reveal the identity of these three manifestations or prophets of God that were foretold and did appear to fulfill those prophecies of the three woes in the book of Revelation. Woe number one, this was the prophet Muhammad who began his revelation from God around the year 610 Common Era. The official beginning of Islam was the year 622 Common Era. Woe number two was the Bab who declared his identity and mission in the year 1844. Woe number three was Baha'u'llah who proclaimed his identity in the year 1863 Common Era. The beasts mentioned in the book of Revelation have been the source of fright, confusion, suspicion even. We need to clarify a lot about these beasts in this supremely interesting group of interrelated prophecies called the Book of Revelation. So next is what I call a primer on the beasts of Revelation. Some people are confused about how many beasts there are in the Book of Revelation. To some, they seem to be everywhere, from beginning to end. Here's one of the sources of confusion. The numbers you see here are the number of separate and distinct beasts in the four versions of the Bible shown in the column headings A, B, C, and D. The King James Version of the Bible is in column A. As you can see, there are 7 separate beasts by terminology in the King James Version. But you see in columns B, C, and D for the New King James Version, the New American Standard Bible, and the New International Version, all show that these versions only mention 3 separate beasts. Note that the King James Version was published first in the year 1611. Since that time, there have been older Greek texts of Revelation discovered that resulted in an updated understanding of the meanings, and scholars have, through close reading of the texts, come to understand that some of these beasts were good beasts and some were bad beasts. For example, in the King James Version in chapter 4, it speaks of 4 beasts circling around the throne of God. These 4 beasts are depicted as praising God and the Lamb and he who sits on the throne. Obviously, 4 good beasts. But later in Revelation, starting in chapter 9, Revelation's story centers on some 3 other beasts that are very, very nasty critters, working against the Lamb, he who sits on the throne, and their purposes. These bad beasts of Revelation are what the other versions of the Bible are counting as beasts, not the 4 good beasts mentioned in the King James Version before chapter 9. To illustrate this division in the definition of the beasts, I've provided this graphic. On the far left, we start with the 7 beasts mentioned in the old King James Version, and split those 7 into 3 bad beasts and the 4 good beasts seen in the throne room. The later versions of the Bible changed the terminology of the references to 4 good beasts by calling them living creatures instead of beasts. They are living because they have recognized the sovereignty of God, unlike the 3 bad beasts that work against God's will. The remaining beasts are then simply referred to as beasts in the text of the other than the King James Version, of course. This primer is about the 3 bad beasts since they have caused so much damage to God's message and messengers in the past and on into the present. How much longer into the future their ill effects are felt is yet unknown. If we count the number of mentions of the words beast or beasts and living creatures for those same versions of the Bible, we can see that the King James Version makes no differentiation between good and bad beasts in their translation's terminology. I thought it necessary to clarify why this primer on the beasts of Revelation only covers the 3 bad beasts. To make this perfectly clear, I hope, 3 beasts are bad, evil kings, the 3 bad beasts of the book of Revelation, meaning that they're spiritually deprived and depraved, spiritually diseased. They are outright enemies of God and His manifestations or prophets and work against them and their divine purposes. These beasts are primarily in chapters 9 through 20 of the book of Revelation. Note that these 3 beasts appear sequentially, not at the same time, in the chronology of the book of Revelation. But note that their effects in the world continues on to and through the time of the following beast. And yes, counter to a lot of people's beliefs, there is a logical chronology in Revelation. It's just that it is given in a series of repeated chronologies. To understand this chronology, please see my video titled Book of Revelation Chronology and Structure on YouTube at the link shown here on this slide. I will provide a clickable link to it in this video's description on YouTube. This is a timeline showing when the 3 beasts appeared. All dates are given in the Common Era years in the Gregorian calendar. Note that this timeline is not to scale. Beast number 1 made its appearance when Muhammad was first beginning to teach the revelations he was receiving from the angel Gabriel. This was around the year 610 on the far left of the screen. The first person who began to fight against Muhammad was the emir or king of Mecca named Abu Sufyan. Then his son, named Muawiyah, continued that resistance to Muhammad and his teachings thereafter. Muawiyah and his father lost that fight and pretended to convert to Islam. Muawiyah became the 5th caliph after Muhammad's death by violence and murder. That is, he became caliph because of his violence and murder. There were rumors that Muhammad was killed, but that has never been confirmed. He set in place people of his clan, the Umayyad clan, to set up the Umayyad dynasty of caliphs that lasted from the year 661 to 750 Common Era, a period of 150 years. It is important to note that beast number 1 is the red dragon mentioned in the book of Revelation, chapter 12, verse 3. Beast number 2 was the Abbasid clan, which took power from the Umayyads by murdering them in the year 750. Thus, they literally took power from the first beast. The Abbasid dynasty of caliphs were beast number 2. They set about murdering the male offspring of Muhammad that the Umayyads had begun. Their dynasty ended when the Mongols invaded Baghdad, which was their headquarters in that area, in the year 1258, and the Mongols took power. The Abbasids continued with the malignant materialism corruption of the leadership of Islam that the beast number 1 had started. Now we go to the right side of the timeline, which picks up some 586 years later when, in the year 1844, the Bab declared his divine identity and mission in May of 1844. He, the Bab, was the fulfillment of Islamic prophecies of the Mahdi or Qaim and was the forerunner to the soon-to-appear Messiah, the returned Christ Spirit, who would be Baha'u'llah, of course, which Baha'u'llah means in English, the glory of God, if you recall. Baha'u'llah would make his announcement of his divine identity in the year 1863. At that time, the third beast arose when the Shah, or King of Persia, Muhammad Shah, was in power. He and his Grand Vizier, that's his Prime Minister, began to persecute the Bab and his followers, of which there were thousands. Some estimate into the hundreds of thousands at one point. His son, Nasir-Din Shah, continued this violent practice, only worse in effects, after the death of Muhammad Shah in 1848. Nasir-Din Shah, whose photo is in the upper right corner, became the embodiment of the beast and thus earned the name of 666 in chapter 13, verse 18 of Revelation. Nasir-Din Shah was highly corrupt, as was his government. The Muslim clergy of the time were also corrupt in that they pushed the Shah and his government to obliterate the Bab, Baha'u'llah, and their followers. The source of their corruption? Malignant materialism. They knew they would lose their power and the comfort of their positions if they recognized the Bab and Baha'u'llah as God's latest manifestations. Thus, they sought to put an end to them. The third beast continues its corrupt effects through the present leadership of Persia, now called Iran. It needs to be clarified and emphasized that the effects of the first beast, the Red Dragon, did not end with the end of the Umayyad dynasty's demise in the year 750 Common Era. The Red Dragon beast basically created the following two beasts. The three beasts together have perpetuated the corruption of the first beast. Their corruption was not solely forcing the people in those areas to obey, pay tribute, and keep them in power, actions associated with the mark of the beast. Their main corruption was denial of God's prophets or manifestations, and their deadly maneuvering against them, including killing them and their followers. The antichrist spirit also infected them. The corrupting influence of this befouled leadership has not been restricted to areas of the world led by Islamic leaders, but is now spread throughout the world. Malignant materialism results whenever the reins of divine laws weaken and the antichrist spirit makes inroads into the population. See my video about antichrist. It's called, oddly enough, The Antichrist, Fact or Fantasy. I'll put a clickable link to it in the description of this video in YouTube. The effects of these three beasts, that continues to this day, was damage to the leadership of Islam, not necessarily affecting individual believers who try to be true to the Quran, the holy book of Islam. The Quran text has not been corrupted, although some interpretations of the text has been twisted from the true meanings. Now, this corruption of the leadership, being malignant materialism at its roots, then took precedence in the nations. Thus it sapped and diminished the spiritual strength and vitality of Islam. Please do not blame individual Muslims. This is not at all saying that Islam itself is corrupt, but rather that the leadership was corrupted. Islam, the pure practice of the faith, is not corrupted. To reiterate, it is the leadership that was affected by these three beasts and those who followed their dictates and became followers of the beast rather than followers of Muhammad and the Quran. There's a few more slides I want to show you that will give a little bit more information about these three bad beasts. And hopefully these graphics will fill in any blanks in your knowledge about the differentiation of these three beasts in the book of Revelation. In our review of the three bad beasts in the book of Revelation, we are going to use this same format. Column number 1 will state which beast we are reviewing in this table. In this case, it's beast number 1. Column 2 will give the description of the beast from the text of the book of Revelation. Column 3 gives the chapter and verse that the description in column 2 is from. Column 4 gives information about the specific beast individuals that set up the dynasty of caliphs that would also be the beast. Column 5 specifies the holy people that this beast fought against, literally and figuratively. This table shows information about beast number 1, which is described in 3 ways in 3 different verses as shown here in column 2. Let's start with column 2, paragraph A. This beast number 1 is the king who was the angel of the bottomless pit. From chapter 9, verse 11, if you look there to the right in column 3. In column 2, paragraph B, as the beast that ascendeth out of the bottomless pit, obviously related to the verse above, it is under A, from the bottomless pit reference. This is from chapter 11, verse 7. Then in column 2, paragraph C, as a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his heads. That's from chapter 12, verse 3. Shortly, I will tell you more about the 7 heads and 10 horns, etc. As to the identities of this beast, number 1, Abu Sufyan, the emir or king of Mecca, was the beast at the start. Then his son Muawiyah carried on in his father's footsteps. After them, their descendants carried on their treachery through their clan, the Umayyad dynasty of Sunni Islamic rulers. This person, Muawiyah, is important to remember because he was basically the antichrist of the Muhammadan dispensation. And in column 5, who this beast opposed were, at first was Muhammad and Ali, then the descendants of Muhammad through his daughter Fatima and Ali. Beast number 2 is shown here. See column 2, which gives us the description of this beast. Verse 1 of chapter 13, if you look in column 3 there, which is the first paragraph A of column 2, it states that he, John, quote, saw a beast coming out of the sea, that's the area of Babylon, with 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 crowns on its horns, and on each head a blasphemous name. This description is from chapter 13, verse 1. See the note there in the yellow box in the center part of this table. The term sea, as far as its geographical location according to the book of Isaiah, chapter 21, verses 1 and 9, tells us that this beast number 2 would arise out of the area of ancient Babylon. Verse number 2 of chapter 13, about this beast number 2, that it, quote, worshipped the dragon, that's beast number 1, which gave power unto the beast, end quote. That's from chapter 13, verse 2. It's interesting to note that the Abbasids, beast number 2, murdered the Umayyads, beast number 1, in the year 750 Common Era, and took over their empire. Thus they truly took the power of the beast, thus became the next beast. The Abbasid rulers were headquartered in the area of Baghdad, very close to the ancient city of Babylon. Thus they, beast number 2, arose out of the sea, per the quote in paragraph A in column 2. And verse 7 of chapter 13, that's at the bottom of column 2, states it was given unto him, the beast, to make war with the saints and to overcome them. Note in column 5 that this beast, the Abbasids, continued the opposition to Muhammad, Ali, and their true faith by opposing and often killing their descendants, most especially the imams of the Shia sect of Islam, who were descendants of Muhammad. This pattern of destruction was truly a war against the saints, mentioned in verse 7 of chapter 13. So what were these 7 heads with 10 horns that these first 2 beasts are described as having? Well, the heads are symbolic of the nations or dominions of an earthly king or empire. Horns symbolize the individual kings or of the nation or dominion. So this means that 7 dominions over which rule 10 earthly kings. Both the first and the second beasts are described as having 7 heads and 10 horns. A couple of points here I want to emphasize. The 7 heads for both beast number 1 and beast number 2 were the dominions that came under the Sunni Islamic rulership. And second there, that beast number 1 was described as the Great Red Dragon. Here's the list of those 7 dominions of the 7 heads of the beast, both beasts actually, the red dragon as well as the beast number 2 that was symbolic of the Abbasid dynasty of Islamic kings, caliphs. Syria, Persia, Egypt, Africa, Arabia, Andalusia, and Transoxania. This map shows those 7 dominions of the Islamic Empire under beasts number 1 and 2. These 7 dominions are shaded in various colors. The light gray areas were not part of the dominions under the first 2 bad beasts during these times. The red bordered legend in the bottom left corner shows a number for each of those 7 dominions and then identifies what the names of those dominions were. Note that the white borders on the map are modern-day national boundaries, not in existence at the time of this Islamic empire. And this empire has changed its configurations throughout the centuries after the first caliph, after the death of Muhammad in the year 632 Common Era. Muhammad utilized military action mostly to defend his religious community from attacks by enemy tribes and other forces, not for spreading Islam. It was after his death that using force to spread Islam became common. After Muawiyah became the 5th caliph in the year 661 Common Era, and the subversion of the divinely ordained leadership of Islam occurred, that military conquest method of spreading Islam became common. The 10 horns of the red dragon that is symbolic of that first beast, the red dragon, is of course represents the Umayyad dynasty of Islamic caliphs. These are the 10 names that are those 10 horns. Names of the leaders. There were more than 10 leaders, but these are their 10 names. Like, for instance, if you look in number 2, Muawiyah, there was a Muawiyah the first and a Muawiyah the second. Yazid, the next one, there were 3. Yazid the first, the second, and the third. But when you look at just their names, there were 10 of them for that dynasty. These same 7 dominions apply to the second beast, since these 7 dominions were inherited from the first beast. The second beast also has 10 heads, just like the first. Here you see the 10 names of the Abbasid dynasty kings or caliphs. The 10 unrepeated names, that is. There were more than 10 Abbasid dynasty caliphs, however. After the 10th one listed here, al-Mutawakkil, after he was killed, the empire fell apart, and the true power of the empire fell into the hands of others. One caliph after another was killed. The position of the caliph was no longer respected as the prime mover in the empire. As one historian put it, quote, "The empire steadily declined while independent kingdoms and emirates and principalities within it multiplied." End quote. Then in the year 1258, the Mongols invaded and took over Baghdad and the territories surrounding it, thus putting an absolute end to the Abbasid dynasty of caliphs. I think you can see a preponderance of evidence that these two beasts really do apply to these two dynasties of Islamic rulers, and it also lends credence to the idea that chapter 11's story about what happened to the two witnesses truly was about Muhammad and Ali. See my video Revelation Revealed for an explanation of the two witnesses. I'll put a link to that video in the description of this video in YouTube. Now we get to the third bad beast. This is the one we are really interested in, since this is the beast, king, or Shah, who would be the enemies of the Lamb and the one who sits on the throne of the book of Revelation when they appear. And this is the beast 666, and where the mark of the beast mentions are in this area, in this time when this beast appears. Now the third beast is different from the previous two beasts. Chapter 13 verse 11 tells us that unlike the two previous beasts that arose out of the sea, meaning out of the area of the world around Babylon, this third beast instead would arise from the earth, meaning in Bible prophecy terms, would come from Persia, now known as Iran. There is one similarity to the first beast per verse 11. The third beast spoke like a dragon, meaning like the previous beasts, in other words, viciously in word and action. The third beast has only one head but two horns. This means it would have one dominion, Persia, with two kings, the two horns, who would be this beast along with their kingdom. This beast is also associated with the name or title of 666. I mentioned that before. Once we get to the third beast here in chapter 13 verse 11, we leave the story of the first woe, Muhammad, and dive into the coming of the Lamb, the second woe, and then the one who sits on the throne, the third woe. This third beast, two Shahs of Persia, was the enemy of both the Lamb, the forerunner of the Messiah, and the Messiah himself. And they were, of course, the Lamb and he who sits on the throne of the book of Revelation, respectively. Meaning, of course, that this beast opposed and warred against the Bab and Baha'u'llah. To emphasize, the third beast has one head with two horns in the prophecy, which means it is a single kingdom with two kings. Kings are known as Shahs in Persia. Since a horn symbolizes a king or ruler, this third beast having two horns means two kings will play an important part in the fulfillment of this prophecy, which is exactly what happened. What is the significance of the appearance of beast number 3? It signals where and when the Messiah of the latter days, the returned Christ Spirit, will appear. And where is that? If you did not catch the mention on a previous slide, Persia, now known as Iran. There are two ways the mark of the beast prophecy was fulfilled. One was a literal fulfillment, the other a symbolic or spiritual fulfillment. The one literal fulfillment was by the abusive use of what was called the jizya tax on non-Muslims in Muslim-controlled territories. This tax began under Muhammad and was called for in the Quran. The purpose of the tax was to have non-Muslims pay their fair share of the cost of protecting their area of the world. Muslims were already taxed, so to speak, through the laws of the Quran, requiring Muslims to contribute to their local mosque and community. It is like what is proposed nowadays of having electric car owners pay a special tax for road construction and maintenance because electric car owners no longer pay gas taxes that other gasoline-powered vehicle owners pay through taxes on the fossil fuels they use that currently is the predominant source of funds for road building and maintenance. Both electric and gasoline-powered vehicles use the roads, so all need to help pay for them. It's a matter of community needs, meaning having good roads, and fairness. The original intent of the jizya tax was the same intent as this special tax for electric car owners, meaning just for fairness and bearing the costs of the community. But once the beasts got involved with the jizya tax system, corruption entered into how these taxes were administered. The symbolic fulfillment was what was mentioned at the beginning of this video when I revealed that the three beasts' corruption was its mark or sign. This sign was in evidence when the herald of the Messiah and the Messiah himself was present, starting in Persia in the mid-1800s. The jizya taxes, as enforced under the beasts' rule, were unjustly applied and the money diverted into their private coffers, not into the communities to which the funds were supposed to go. The abuse of the jizya tax collection began when the Umayyads, beast number 1, when they took over areas under Muslim control. Their corrupt ways turned this jizya tax into a private wealth generator for the Umayyads themselves. It then continued under the next two beasts. These two next beasts also wanted in on this profitable corruption. The tattooing of non-Muslims, either on the forehead or on the arm, was not from the Quran, but was another aspect of the corruption of the leadership by these three beasts and their cronies. A physical mark on non-Muslims, Jews and Christians and others, also turned this mark of the tax into a source of treating non-Muslims as second or third-class citizens rather than as equals to Muslims. And the marks made it easier to persecute them if some individuals were so moved, although they shouldn't have been, because Muhammad instructed that people of the book, Jews and Christians, were not to be persecuted. Note that the very poor and disabled were exempted from this tax, and in some locations some non-Muslim men who paid the tax were then exempt from military service. The jizya tax has been eliminated in more recent times in most areas. Shown are two examples of these marks. Top you can see a tattoo on the forehead of a young woman, and below that on the wrist of another. In effect, the corrupt implementation of the jizya tax, although a literal fulfillment of the prophecy of the mark of the beast, it was basically also indicating that the mark of the beast was at play here too, as an indicator of corruption. Both the literal and the symbolic fulfillments of the mark of the beast in these ways actually were indications that both meant corruption caused and promoted by the beasts. All of these marks of the beast, both literal and symbolic, are pointing to corruption as the mark these leaders and their followers have against them. And these marks of corruption, by their existence, are all pointing to their opposites. The three pure divine manifestations of God, also known as prophets of God, prophesied in the book of Revelation. The corruption of the beasts and their cronies serves to highlight the purity of their opposites, those manifestations of God. Those three future manifestations of God are Muhammad, the Bab, and Baha'u'llah. Followers of the beast, any of these three beasts, got their marks of the beast by following these misguided, if not downright evil leaders, meaning they were corrupted by malignant materialism, just as these three bad beasts themselves were. When the verses speak of some of these followers of the beast getting a mark on their foreheads, that means that their minds have been corrupted. What's in your forehead? The brain is there in your forehead, which we associate now with our mind. To illustrate the term "in their foreheads," it's also used in chapter 22, verse 4, wherein it is stated, quote, "And they shall see his face, and his name shall be in their foreheads," end quote. The face they are seeing in chapter 22 of Revelation is that of the Messiah, the glory of God. So in that case, his name being in their foreheads is a wonderful thing. It means their minds and souls are affected by the Messiah. Just like in the case of the beast's followers would be affected in their minds and souls by these evil people. Whereas the mark of the beast being put on your hand means the actions you perform with your hands, which are corrupted by the beasts and their malignant materialism, corrupted by following their orders and the examples of the beasts. Next on the agenda is telling you the year the Bible says that the Messiah of the latter days, that's the returned Christ, will appear. And that year was 1844 Common Era. That was the year that the Messiah's dispensation began by the arrival of his forerunner, the Bab. It was also when the third bad beast of the book of Revelation began his nefarious actions. This graph shows the meanings of the 70 weeks prophecy of the first coming of the Messiah, Jesus Christ, and that prophecy was from the book of Daniel chapter 9, and the meaning of the 2300 days prophecy of the second coming of the Messiah from chapter 8 of Daniel. This diagram is very similar to the original one developed by the Seventh-day Adventists, showing the timeline for that 2300 day or 2300 year period in Daniel chapter 8 verse 14 that prophesies the 2300 day period or 2300 year period until the Messiah comes. It starts at the far left at 457 BC. When Artaxerxes signed a decree to rebuild Jerusalem in that year, which is the starting point for the count of both of these prophecies, both the 70 weeks prophecy and the 2300 days prophecy. The high long arch is the 2300 year prophecy period of time from chapter 8. The 70 weeks prophecy is shown at the far left. That's the little goalposts of that 70-week period, which is actually 490 years. So both prophecies, the first and second advents of the Messiah prophecies, start at exactly the same beginning point, 457 BC. This is how we already know that this 2300 year period ends in the year 1844 Common Era, and that's when the Messiah would return. Note also that the year 1844 Common Era is the same year as the Islamic calendar year of 1260. Note that the year 1844 Common Era is the culmination of several time prophecies in the Bible foretelling when the Messiah would appear in the latter days. The green timeline at the bottom of the slide starts in the year 602 BC with the start of the prophecy in Daniel chapter 4 verses 25 and 32 about the length of King Nebuchadnezzar's punishment for being ungrateful to God. Note that the prophecy's hidden meaning is that the 7 times of punishment applies to humanity as a whole, not just punishment of this long-dead King Nebuchadnezzar. The next prophecy, below that, see the white horizontal arrow, the one called the 2300 days prophecy, is from the book of Daniel chapter 8 verse 14. The beginning of the prophecy timeline was in the year 457 BC. It culminated in that same year, 1844 Common Era, meaning that the year 1844 would be when the Messiah of the latter days would appear. The wide, short, pink arrow shows the prophecy that is given in several Bible books and verses as 1260 days, or you might see it as a time, times, and half a time, or as 42 months. They all mean the same period of time, which was 1260 lunar years, starting in 622 Common Era, when Islam officially began, and ending in, wouldn't you know, 1844 Common Era, the very year that the Bab made his proclamation as being a manifestation of God, and that he also was the forerunner of one even greater than he, who he called him whom God shall make manifest, meaning a person whose divine title was Baha'u'llah, which means the glory of God in English. 1844 was also the very beginnings of Jews returning to their land of Israel, with an awakening goal of forming their own nation once again, as they were promised in Jewish scriptures. In that year, 1844, Ottoman government restrictions of non-Muslims ended by edict of the courts, and all non-Muslims began to have equality before the law and freedom to worship their own faiths, including Judaism. Thus the Jews were no longer denied returning to the Holy Land, and they began to do so. Thus, we now know that the year 1844 is important in the timeline of when the Messiah would appear. The book of Revelation tells us that 2 kings of Persia will oppose him, so let's look at who the Shahs of Persia were around that year of 1844. The 2 kings who were the horns of the beast of Persia, that's the beast number 3, and were called beasts themselves, are shown on this timeline at the very top. On the left, Muhammad Shah Qajar. The arrow there is showing the length period of time that he reigned. By the way, Qajar is the dynasty name of these 2 Shahs. He reigned from 1834 until his death in 1848. Next on the right is Nasiruddin Shah Qajar, who reigned from 1848 until he was assassinated in 1896. The timeline shows the reigns of these 2 kings, that they overlapped the earthly divine reigns of the Lamb of the book of Revelation, the Elijah figure to the Messiah, and that's on the left, bottom left, and the one who sits on the throne, the Messiah, who were the Bab and Baha'u'llah, respectively. This is the Shrine of the Bab, a golden dome structure on the side of Mount Carmel in Haifa, and it's the final resting place of the Bab. This is the Shrine of Baha'u'llah, the final resting place of the Messiah for the new era, the return to Christ's Spirit. The shrine is located just outside of Akka, Israel. Just beyond the Shrine of the Bab in the foreground are the buildings of the World Center that house the administrative functions of the worldwide Baha'i faith community. There are about 10 million Baha'is, followers of Baha'u'llah, in the world, with about 170,000 of them in the United States. The last few slides of this video give information resources to find out more about the Bab, Baha'u'llah, and their faith, the Baha'i faith. If you'd like to find a book that gives a good, interesting overview of the Baha'i faith, its main figures, history, beliefs, and its followers, without being preachy or trying to convert you, this is the book for you. Its title is Baha'u'llah and the New Era by the author J.E. Esselmont. It's available through Amazon.com and probably other online book vendors too. It may even be in your local library or your local independent bookstore. This is a great little documentary. It's about an hour long. Its title is The Gate, Dawn of the Baha'i Faith. It's a story of the forerunner to the Messiah. It's a story of the Bab, and it's professionally produced, and you can watch it for free on YouTube. Just go to YouTube and put into the search box the channel name, The Gate, that you see in the bottom right, The Gate Film, all one word, The Gate Film, all one word. And in looking around there, you'll see that it's in quite a few different languages, so make sure you choose the right language. Again, it's about an hour long. It's for free. Here are some official Baha'i websites. Top one there is www.bahai.org. That's the international official website for those seeking information about the Baha'i Faith, and it has a link to the online library of sacred and authoritative texts that are available, accessible for free. Next is www.bahai.us. That's the USA official website for seekers who want information about the Baha'i community in the United States. Then we have Baha'i.org/library, and that is access, again, free to the sacred and authoritative texts and other publications by worldwide Baha'i community. Then at the bottom, the USA bookstore, that's BahaiBookstore.com. It's the official online bookstore for the USA. You can purchase books, videos, music, and some other items through this site as well. You don't have to be a Baha'i to purchase things. Here's a list of many of my other videos, all on YouTube, mostly on prophecy fulfillment by the main 4 founding figures of the Baha'i Faith. You can read the titles. There's a variety of topics. Pause the video to review them to see if any might interest you. Instructions on how to access them, all for free, on YouTube is on the next slide. Here is how to find my videos on Bible prophecy fulfillment. In the youtube.com site, enter my channel name shown here, Integral Destiny 9. All one word, no spaces in between. A direct URL to get to my channel is shown here. That's the youtube.com/c/Integral Destiny 9. Note that some clickable links to some of my videos are in the description for this video on YouTube. Please note that this video is an amateur production by this singular person, me, and it's very obvious it's an amateur production. It's not an official production by the Baha'i Faith community. Copyright protections are claimed. Please do not make changes, additions, or deletions to this presentation. Have questions? Contact me at the email address you see there. And thank you for watching.